Welcome to the November 2016 Third Thursday Operations Improvement Series e-learning program. Today's topic is Preserving Precious Capital, attacking the 7 most significant capital wasters in your company. Today's program is brought to you by the Manufacturing Executive Institute and presented by myself, Alan Dunn, President of GDI Consulting and Training Company. Before we get started, I want to just remind everybody a little bit about the Manufacturing Executive Institute. MEI is a training and publishing organization that's dedicated to bringing relevant knowledge to individuals and to organizations who are really interested in making dramatic performance improvements in their manufacturing and distribution companies. MEI delivers knowledge to these companies in 4 distinctly different ways. One is through live training programs at MEI's Training Center in Corona, California. If you're ever in Southern California, please come by and visit our training center and see what we do. The second way we deliver knowledge is through e-learning programs produced by our business unit, Radio MEI. Again, stop by and take a look at our web development studio. I think you'll be impressed. Our third way of delivering knowledge is through our publications, our MEI bookstore, and other resources. You can see all of these on our website at www.mfgexecutive.com. And our fourth way is, of course, through our research projects that we periodically do. Today's program is part of the Third Thursday Operations Improvement Series. These programs are presented free every month on the third Thursday of the month, always at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. These programs are designed to focus on methods, techniques, and ideas for improving performance in all disciplines normally associated with operations and supply chain management. These topics are always narrow and they're always focused, and they're usually suggested by listeners of these programs. So we would hope that you would set aside 10 to 11 a.m. every month to attend these free Third Thursday programs. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alan Dunn. I'm president of GDI Consulting and Training Company. I'm also the founder of the Manufacturing Executive Institute and have been an instructor at the California Institute of Technology's Center for Technology and Management Education for more than 32 years. I've been in the manufacturing and distribution industry for well more than 35 years. I sit on boards of directors, particularly of Idaho Asphalt and Natural Alternatives, and I used to be the chairman of APICS, the preeminent professional association for manufacturing and distribution supply chain executives. I'm actively engaged in a number of other professional associations, including the Society for Human Resource Management, the Society of Cost Management, and the National Council of Corporate Directors, where I was the recipient in 2007 of their Board Member of the Year for the United States. So I see organizations from the bottom up, from the storeroom, and from the top down, from the boardroom. And that's what gives me a sense of what topic is urgent and what is not so urgent. And this is an urgent topic today. It's urgent for at least 3 and perhaps more reasons. The first one is that all companies need to aggressively attack waste. We need to aggressively attack it like it's never been attacked before. It's very likely that in the next 12 months, we're going to be in another recession. We should learn to love recessions because recessions are where market share most readily changes hands. But it requires that you protect your capital going into that recession so you have it available to take care of or to take advantage of opportunities during the recession. All companies that we have visited have at least 6 or 7 specific areas of waste reduction opportunity, and that's what I want to talk about today. And all companies that we've met seem to need a usable framework for waste reduction activity. So this is kind of our mission today, to try to address these issues. Now, a PDF copy of this e-learning program is available to all participants. You can download it during the program by using the download attachment feature, or you can simply email us and we'll be more than happy to send you another one. A recorded version of this program will be available at www.mfgexecutive.com, and you can find the program link by going to the page and looking at that tab called Resources, and then you'll see it. You probably have to register, but it will be there and available. So let's get started. Let's talk about how to preserve precious capital. Let's talk about those 7 most significant capital wasters in your organization. Now let's do this in a structured approach. So my first objective is to demonstrate why we need to use a more aggressive approach in managing our capital. Second objective would be to really talk about some solid mechanisms, some applications, if you will, for cost reduction. And the third is to provide some additional tools that you can use literally starting the day after this presentation. Now, a lot of you are asking, why do we need to get so aggressive on waste reduction? Well, we're bound and determined to be in another economic recession. And so you really need capital to survive and to prosper in those recessions. You need capital to invest during those economic recessions. You need it to invest in perhaps acquisitions or training to make you stronger coming out of the recession. Your company needs to reduce debt loads and increase your equity. This is what makes a company strong. And then you need to invent capital during the economic recessions. You need to find ways to reduce inventory, to invent that capital in order to come out of the recession as a dominant player. So managing the precious capital is managing the fuel that feeds the hungry machine of your business. And we need to save and we need to preserve that so when we get into the recession, we can pull the trigger into the kinds of investments that will not only help us to survive, but will help us to prosper and dominate in our marketplace. You know, there's a metaphor that we use, and it's kind of a medical metaphor that talks about cash is to a corporation what blood is to the biological being. It's what carries the nourishment through an organization, just as blood carries nourishment and waste products away from the organs. It's that nourishment that then keeps us healthy. It's the cash that leads to profits. And it's those profits, those healthy profits, that lead to growth or give us life. Capital is to a manufacturing company what blood is to the biological being. It carries nourishment to all corners of the enterprise. That said, we really need to think about capital as cash-based capital. Steven Renberg, a client of mine a number of years ago, said something that I've never forgotten. He said, today, profits are a concept, but at the end of the day, cash is still king. Cash is king because valuation of your business is really determined by how much cash flow your business generates off of a suite of gross assets. So value isn't about profits. Value isn't about earnings per share. Value isn't about revenue growth. Value isn't about gross margin or variable gross margin. The value of an enterprise, a manufacturing or distribution enterprise, is ultimately measured by how much cash flow is created off of a suite of gross assets. And gross assets tend to be property, plant, and equipment, the intellectual property, the brand equity of the business, so there's some intangibles in there, the inventory and the cash net of payables, or receivables net of payables and cash, and perhaps even some sort of intangible value of the management and the leadership team. So gross assets is both the tangible and intangible assets of the business. And it's those assets before depreciation. It's those assets in true gross form. So if you buy into the belief that we can increase value by increasing the amount of cash flow off of a suite of gross assets, that suggests that if you keep your gross assets constant and your cash flow improves, in other words, let's say utilization increases because sales go up, then your cash flow will increase. But if you buy a plant and can't fill it up, your gross assets increase and your cash flow doesn't. So you can create value by working on the numerator or the denominator or both. You either increase the numerator, holding the denominator constant, or you hold the numerator constant and you reduce the denominator, or you do both. Leaders need to find ways to increase cash flows and better utilize their gross assets. So this means we need to go after the things that waste cash. So a good framework for finding waste really needs to be created, and here's kind of a beginning point for you. We say go after the top 7 capital wasters that we see in organizations today. First one is stop selling money-losing products. This sounds really simple, but boy, it is not. Second one is how to preserve your capital through rapid inventory reductions. In other words, get rid of inventory and get rid of it quick. Stop converting your liquidity to inventory. There's really 4 buckets of inventory in terms of states of inventory. There's cash, turn that into raw materials, turn that into work in process, turn that into finished goods, and then turn it back into cash again. And we want to keep our inventory in the rawest state possible. So inventory, really in the form of cash, not yet converted to raw materials, has infinite opportunities. You can use the cash to buy inventory. You can use it to hire more people. You can use it to send people to programs like this. You can use it to buy equipment. You can buy a new truck with it. You can build a new conference room. Cash has all kinds of alternatives. But once you convert that cash into raw material, say coiled steel, you can't do anything with it except use it as coiled steel. In other words, if the product you're making needs aluminum, you can't make it out of coiled steel. It's got to be made out of aluminum. So you can see you start to reduce the alternatives for that asset. Now once you make that coiled steel into a left door panel for a Toyota Camry, pretty much that's all it can be used for, is a left door of a Toyota Camry. And then when you finish up the Toyota Camry, you can't sell it as a Toyota Tacoma. And so once it's a finished product, it can only be sold in the identity of that finished product. And so each step of the way through the state of inventories, from cash to raw to WIP to finished goods, you increase the risk of your business because you reduce the alternative uses or the alternate uses of that material or of that inventory. And ultimately, when you sell the final product, then it goes back to cash. We need to find a way to minimize the amount of dollars in those various states of inventory and keep it in cash as long as we possibly can. The third big way to protect and to go after capital wasters is to make it okay for customers to pay their invoices quickly. In other words, you need to collect your money quicker. And we're going to talk about this because there's so many things you can do in manufacturing to cause your customers to pay their bills slower. And there's a few important things you need to master in order to collect that money quicker. Fourth is rapidly right-size your indirect workforce. We constantly work on direct, but the real value opportunity, the real capital waste reduction opportunity is in the indirect workforce. And we're going to talk about how to identify minimum needs and how to make tough decisions. Oh boy, number 4 is so difficult to do because you're talking about human beings. Number 5 is to stop building or inventory that is a result of forecast error. Since we know that all forecast error ends up in inventory, it's really time to stop having bad forecasts. So we need to find a way to reduce sales forecast error. And by the way, there's things that the sales department can do, and there's one big thing that the operations organization can do that will improve the performance of the company better than any forecast system improvement that can ever be made. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. The 6th large capital waster is about bringing salaries, wages, and particularly bonus compensations back to reality. Now, a lot of that's happened since our last recession, but there's still some work to happen. This is not 2007, prior to the financial meltdown in North America. Comp plans still need to be revised to reflect economic realities. And number 7 is reduce the variable spend on raw materials. In other words, reduce our purchase spend. And we're going to prove to you that outside of raising sales price, nothing creates value faster than reducing material spend. So let's get at it, and let's talk about the first item, how to stop selling money-losing products. First off, go take a courage pill, because you have to have courage. You then have to stratify your sales by variable margin contribution. Variable margin contribution typically means revenue minus materials and labor and perhaps variable energy costs. Determine which products are creating variable margin, that is the revenue minus variable costs. Select the negative variable margin items and demand proof from your sales and marketing organizations for whatever strategic or economic or other reasons for keeping these products in the product portfolio. You can underline or circle that word proof on this page. Proof that customers will reduce other items, item purchases, as if the NVM items are taken out. And we'll hear this all the time. The sales will say, if you take product A out because we're not making any money on it, then our customers will stop buying B, C, D, E, and F. Well, that's easy to say. Now prove it. Now prove it. This is one of the things I say to salespeople all the time. Give me evidence, and some instinct is not pure evidence. If a lot of people have that same instinct, I want to figure out why they have that instinct. But we hear this all the time. You cannot get rid of that money-losing little product that takes away too much of our capacity, makes us no money, because if you do, Alan, you know the customers won't buy the other items. And you just have to squint your eyes and look at them and ask, how do you know that? Where's your data? Where's your facts? We also need to have proof that the negative variable margin products will impact the future marketability of our business or all of our products. Once we get that, and then you have the courage to get rid of some items, to fire some customers and fire some products, then offer a one-time sale on the remaining items in stock and get rid of the products. Make it an aggressive sale, but get rid of them. And the reason we want to do that is that we want to start trying to find a way to generate a little bit of revenue as we're closing a product down. So you can see in the bottom right corner, you can see how we calculated, in this case, our variable margin. We took our revenue and subtracted from that our variable conversion cost of direct material, indirect materials, and direct labor, and also our conversion support labor, the outside processing, and maybe the variable factory burden, like variable electricity and energy and things like that. So in this case, the $10.2 million revenue subtracting the $8.6 of variable costs gives us a $1.569 million variable margin. Probably not, ratio-wise, 15%, probably not going to be at the top of the product elimination list, because that's not a bad margin. But we have to do this, and like I started off, you have to take the courage pill, and you have to demand evidence. You have to demand proof that you're going to reduce, that sales aren't going to go haywire. By the way, when you do this, it's really good to understand the characteristics and behaviors of costs. So the blue line on this chart represents variable costs. So they vary proportionately with volume. If volume doubles, the material and the variable costs will literally double. However, your fixed cost, represented by the green line, this is the property and plant. And at some point in time in companies, you tend to find yourself operating at a point where you're, assuming the blue line now is volume, that you're working overtime because you don't have enough resources. So I'll draw it a little bit lower. So you see down here, you can see we actually are having to, the demand is greater than the supply of resources to fix it. So then we buy another machine, and immediately you go up to this next level. So here's the takeaway. Fixed costs grow in step function format, and you are the most underutilized the moment after you bring a new piece of equipment or a factory or a plant online, because you have to fill it up. And at some point in time, you'll find that you have more demand that you can make, so you're working the overtime. FedEx is hot and heavy working for you, and then you eventually hire, or rather you build some more plant and equipment, and then for some period of time in here, you are actually underutilized until it catches up, and here you go again. So it turns out that fixed costs grow in step functions, but the semi-fixed costs, represented by red, which is almost entirely people costs, the supporting engineers, the supporting maintenance people, the supporting quality assurance, the same thing happens. You're overly busy, you're working overtime, then you hire a couple more people, and then everybody's cruising for a while until it happens again. So the takeaway here is semi-fixed costs or people costs also tend to grow in step function. So what's important is if you tend to hire a bunch of people and then this blue line kind of goes flat on you, then you have to make some tough decisions, because now you're going to have perpetual underutilization of your people unless you do something about it. Second idea for eliminating waste is to do some rapid inventory reduction activities. And by the way, here is the secret. Everybody listen close to what I'm about to say, because this is going to rock your world in terms of how to reduce inventory. Do not focus on reducing raw material. Do not focus on reducing finished goods. Go after the work in process. Attack for work in process. Look at lead times and safety stock and really nothing else. Compare the planned lead time to the actual work time. Cut 20% of the lead time items, the top lead time items, in other words, the items that have the longest lead time relative to work time. Cut their lead times by 20% and rerun MRP. And do this every week, perhaps every Friday. Recalculate the safety stock with the new lead times. Remember, safety stock is always formula-driven, always has been formula-driven, always should be formula-driven. There's no such thing as safety stock that's derived from I think I just have 2 weeks or 2 months or 6 months on hand. That's ridiculous. All safety stock is driven by a formula where the single biggest variable is the lead time. The longer the lead time on replenishment, the greater the safety stock should be. That should tell you something, by the way, that one of the ways of reducing safety stock, whether it's of raw or finished goods, is to reduce lead time. Attack the lead time for a WIP. Let me show you how this works. So here's an interesting chart. This is a chart where we took a company and we took all their part numbers, and this is all manufactured parts. And there were a lot more. I just truncated the list. And so the first item is part number 5465. And we went into the item master, and it has 20 days of lead time. Since we work 20 hours a day at the very top of the sheet, that means 20 times 20 is 400 hours. So the lead time in hours can be restated as 400 hours. Believe it or not, when we went to the production bill of operations, sometimes known as a router, and we looked at the standard work times, go to this work center, do the work, an hour here, and then the next work center, an hour, another work center, an hour and a half, we ended up with 3.5 hours of actual touch time. So the lead time was 400 hours. The touch time is 300 hours. The difference is 397. We just rounded it here. So I want you to think about that. That difference can only be sitting in one place. Can you guess? If you said Q, work in process Q, you were right. That 397 hours is represented by items sitting in front of a machine, or sitting in front of a work center, or sitting in front of a work cell in queue waiting to get going. Now, if you just look at the lead time and what the multiple of it is relative to the work time, you'll discover that the lead time is 114 times bigger than the router work time. People say to me, oh, really, Alan, that's not realistic. 3.5 hours with 400 hours or 20 days of lead time. Actually it is. I see this every single day. Now, not every single item, but I do see it in virtually every factory. This is a staple analytic that we run, a diagnostic routine that we run in every inventory reduction consulting project that we've ever done. So back to the formula itself. So we look at the multiples, and in this case, that one item of all my queue, that represents around 19% of the queue, that one item, the 19% of the queue. Then we do it for the next item, 5832. Lead time is 92 days, 20 hours a day, 1,840 hours. The router work time says we work 21.34 hours on this. We have a difference of 1,819 hours of difference. That's 86 times more lead time than work time. And that accounts for 15% of my total queue. Added together with the item above, we're now at 34%. And so you can see it's much like a Pareto analysis, and we finally get down to here where we can talk about what causes 80% of our queue. And when you look at it, what causes 80% of our queue are simply 8 items. 8 items out of our total item master are causing 80%. These 8 items are 80% of our queue. So we draw this line. We draw this line across, and we say, okay, we're only going to worry about the ones above that line. Then here's the cool trick. We go into that first item, 5465, that has 20 days of lead time, and we cut the lead time by 20%. We literally go into the item master and reduce it by 20%. So 20% of 20 days of lead time is we are going to go in there and take 4 days out of that lead time. And so the lead time is going to be 16 days, going to determine the hours of that. And what's going to happen is that's going to then take a whole lot of orders after MRP runs, a whole lot of orders, and it's going to reschedule them out or suggest cancellations because you're building inventory with an extraordinarily high perspective of lead time. And every Friday we do this. And at some point in time when all of these have been reduced enough, then these will start to raise to the surface. Much like in statistical process control, which is once you start to get major variables under control, other major variables start to show up as the new critical variables. So the process is we run this every single Friday, this analysis, run it automatically, write the program, run it automatically. In fact, I don't even care if you automatically allow the computer to change those lead times. I would probably review them if it was up to me, but I would let the computer perhaps even automatically change those lead times just before the MRP algorithm works. Another way to focus on inventory fast, we're talking about fast reduction of inventory. I'm not talking about something that takes a year. I'm talking about things that start to execute over one inventory turn. So if you're turning inventory 6 times a year, I'm talking about how to bring inventory dramatically down in 2 months in one turn. If you turn your inventory 3 times a year or every 4 months, I'm talking about how to get dramatic inventory reductions in 4 months in one inventory turn. Another way is to take a look statistically at your safety stock and order points. So in this particular case, I have about 10 sales orders over the last year. In this case, my benchmark year was 97. And you can see in January, I had 3 items that were ordered. In February, I had an order for 6. In March, I had an order for 1 and another order for 3. In April, I had an order for 5. In May, I had 2 orders, 1 for 2, 1 for 5. Then I had an order in July for 6, August for 1, and December. So if you add it up, I had 34 total units, or an average order size of 3.4, even though some months there were no orders and other months there were multiple orders. If you divide all that by 52, you end up with 0.65 units per week average weekly sales. If you take those dates and you put them into an Excel spreadsheet and run it through the STDEVP, the standard deviation of the population formula, you come out with a standard deviation of 1.85 units. Remember, standard deviation tells you something about the accuracy of the average. In other words, that 3.4 units average order size and a 0.65, they don't mean much when you have a standard deviation of 1.85. If I multiply that 1.85 by 3 standard deviations, so I can then have an understanding of with a 99.7% probability of certainty, then I can start to have a sense of how much safety stock I should keep. So in this case, if the lead time is 4 weeks and at 0.65 units per week, that's 2.62 units that I should have in safety stock to cover my lead time. But to cover my variations or my volatility in demand, I need another 5.56. So I add that to the 2.62, and that gives me the 8.18. And that's effectively my calculated order point, which in this case is going to serve kind of as my safety stock trigger, if you will. So it says that I need to keep about 8 units in stock. That's what it says. I need to have about 8 units, or at least I need to reorder when I get to 8 units, and so I can have it replenished before a big order comes in. Notice that nowhere on here do we ever have a demand of 8 units in a month, and it's a 4-week lead time, so that seems fairly reasonable. If my unit cost is $394, by the way, this came from a real diagnostic in a real company. The unit cost is $394, therefore the planned inventory should be $3,225, except the company that we did this had $73,000, or 73 units, for $28,000 in inventory. So they had $25,000 of unproductive inventory. So we knew that we could reduce down to certainly less than 10 units. So we can go from 73 to 10 easily, and so you've got 63 units times 394. You do the math. And we would calculate this for every independent demand item, every item we sell directly to customers, and calculate the aggregate savings that can be achieved through this systematic formula driven order point and safety stock calculation. So this is a diagnostic that you should run. It's effectively a quality metric of your inventory. So let's move on to how to collect your accounts receivable quicker. Get your hands on the money quicker. First, you have to be eligible to collect faster. You have to be eligible by delivery times, and delivery quality must be good. In other words, you cannot give your customers an excuse for not paying on time. You can't ever go, well, if you deliver on time, I'd pay on time. Or if we didn't send back rejections, I'd pay you on time. In other words, you need to negate their excuses. You might also offer terms that encourage faster payment, like faster pay discounts or bigger pay discounts. So 3% net 10 or 3% if they pay within 72 hours. Economically, you can do the math. That's a no-brainer. That's an absolute no-brainer. Even 2% net 10 in today's cost of capital world is a no-brainer. You should actually offer those kinds of terms to your customers in order to get them to pay quicker. Get them to do wire transfers, EFTs, or use average pricing, where if they buy 13 different variations of the same item, just have an average price. If the bandwidth of pricing is not super huge and erratic, just have an average price. Make it quicker for them to calculate. And on big projects or big make-to-order activities, get progress payments or get upfront deposits. And one of my favorite is to call 3 days before the expiration of the discount terms. Hire some interns at nearly minimum wage to do this. It's a no-brainer and it's not difficult. 3 days before the expiration of a discount term. So if you give 2% net 10, then on day 7, someone's calling that customer going, you understand, 3 days from now, if you pay between now and 3 days from now, you can deduct 2% from the check that you send us or the money that you wire us. But 3 days and 6 hours from now, that expires. And that's terms you agreed to, Mr. Customer. And so we need to do this, and you can do it inexpensively with interns. So let's go to our 4th out of 7 ideas. This was how to rapidly right-size your indirect force. Oh boy, this is a tough one. Start with asking yourself this simple question. If this indirect person took an extended vacation, would my business irretrievably suffer, or would we just be inconvenienced? If it's just inconvenienced, if this person took 6 or 8 weeks off, then you probably don't need that person. Also ask, will we lose sales as a result of this person's absence? If not, then you might want to, especially if number 2 and 3 are met, you might want to think about reorganizing and probably eliminating that position. Try to combine positions wherever possible. I helped a company I sat on the board of. I encouraged the CFO to become the VP of manufacturing. He was the CFO and VP of manufacturing for 2 years during some rather difficult times. We had a CFO that ultimately learned how to be a manufacturing VP at the same time. It was a lot of work. We eliminated a $300,000 position, and we didn't get a lot better, but we didn't suffer. And oh, by the way, one thing did happen. The CFO learned a lot about operations, and that CFO is now that company's president because he got breadth of experience, not just depth. And that's one of the benefits of combining positions wherever possible. Forget everything you've read in all the texts and all the span of control and span of management issues. In today's electronic world where we can find our inventory ratios on our iPad, we can find out our sales on our iPhone, and we are electronically connected. We have information systems that see from the top to the bottom of the organization. You may not need all those people. It's a difficult decision. Every company and every position is unique. However, letting somebody stay around when a combination of positions is 98% as good and the benefit is saving $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, then you should do that. It may be time in some companies to remove all but the A and B players. And remember that after difficult times, you'll have a business to rebuild. It's always better to do it with solid players going into the recessionary period instead of coming just out of it. Number 5, one of my favorites. How do we reduce sales forecast error? So all forecast error eventually manifests in the form of increased inventory investment. So if you oversell the forecast and end up with shortages to customers, people will never let that happen again, and so they will over-forecast in the future, and then you may end up with too much inventory. If you undersell the forecast, in other words, the demand doesn't come through, well, that immediately ends up in inventory. So it doesn't make any difference. All forecast error eventually ends up in inventory. So there's some things that we need to do. First off, we need to measure forecast error every single week, not every single quarter, not every single week. We need to understand the pulse and the rhythm of our marketplace. We need to do it at the product family level for sure, maybe at the SKU level, but never, never, never at the dollar level. We measure forecast error based on the forecast of units that are being shipped or volume that's being shipped in the case of, say, a chemical company. But we don't look at the dollars because dollars includes pricing decisions. Pricing decisions, I've seen products that are twice as hard to make that sell for half the price of another product. So we can't look at dollars. So we teach this in our forecasting classes. We never forecast in sales dollars and then convert to units. We always forecast in units. What are the predicted units we're going to book? What are the predicted number of units we're going to ship? What's the reason behind all of that? And then convert it to sales dollars later. And we're also looking at absolute error, not net. Somebody could say, well, I have a 2% net error. Well, yeah, you had a 40% downward error coupled with a 42% upward error, 82% aggregate error, but on net it's only 2%. So you can pat yourself on the back and say, oh, I feel pretty good. But you're just deluding yourself. You have to look at the absolute error. And you really need to look back to understand the cause of the error. So you have to go back and find, why did I forecast 100 widgets 3 months ago for this month when every other month was only 50 widgets? Why did I have that spike? And then don't forget this. If you could instantaneously produce anything, if your lead time to produce something was a minute, that was the total cumulative lead time was a minute, then forecasting wouldn't even be important. Because when you got an order, if the customers were willing to wait a day and it only takes you a minute to make, you'd be in no hurry. In other words, the alternative to fixing forecast error is to aggressively reduce lead times. And by aggressively reducing lead times, you not only reduce inventory, but you make it easier to deal with forecast error. In other words, instantaneous supply negates the reason for forecasting. You may not have instantaneous supply, but let me tell you something. A 9-week lead time item is going to give you advantages over a 10-week lead time item over an 11-week lead. So every lead time operations should be focusing on ways to reduce it, whether it's reducing the procurement part of the cumulative lead time, or whether it's reducing the cycle time in the factory, or whether it's reducing the processing and distribution time, transportation time. You should be focusing on cumulative lead time reduction because that always reduces the impact that forecast error has on you, and you get the double whammy. It also reduces your inventory. So just a couple left. Number 6 is try to get compensation back to reality. And boy, if you thought the indirect workforce issue was a tough one, this is a ridiculously tough one. It's time to look at compensation compared to current statistics. Call a lot of local employers, talk to your HR managers, look at what they're paying for specific jobs. It's time to do these kinds of surveys at all levels, including the people who do these surveys. We need to do surveys on them. Reduce salaries to appropriate levels. Actually sit down with people and go, look, the salaries are not represented. If we want to be in the 70th percentile or the 80th percentile, we're still too high. And so you have to find ways to do that. And you don't do it overnight. You give people plenty of time to get used to it. Eliminate all bonuses also that are not explicitly tied to increases in company value. So if the cash flow over gross assets answer is not getting better, then there shouldn't be bonuses. It's as simple as that. If the value of the company is not improving, generally people shouldn't get large bonuses. Now, maybe some bonuses for individual work or group work, but at the end of the day, if that doesn't manifest an increased shareholder value, then really what was the point? And so you really need to build a comprehensive plan that will work after a recession. So on the right side of this page, I kind of give you some ideas during a recession or tough times of how to identify a great employee. I mean, these are really kind of the mentalities of great employees. Look for those who are always finding ways to reduce direct costs. Look for people that are because that goes to cash, that goes to valuation instantaneously. Look for employees that are always finding ways to increase the prices to your customers by offering better service or better delivery reliability or better quality. Find those employees who are always looking for ways to increase the volume of the business. Again, maybe through exemplary customer service, higher quality product, more reliable deliveries. And find a way, finally, to better utilize fixed and semi-fixed assets. Great employees are always worried about wasting assets. They always want to pump more through the factory. They always want to get more volume over the suite of gross assets because they know that's going to increase the value of the business. And lastly, let's talk about ways to reduce raw material spend. So perform a spend analysis similar to what you see on the right side. Stratify your spend. Look only at the 20% of the items that amount to about 80% of the annual spend. So you take a look at this in the plastics, clearly custom molded parts is where you should be focusing your attention. In packaging, clearly cartons and maybe foam is where you should be paying attention. Look at the 20% in terms of which ones had the greatest price appreciation over the last 3 years. So do the purchase spend in the traditional way, which is like what you see to the right side of the screen, but then also go back and stratify and look at purchase material that's had the greatest price appreciation from your suppliers over the last 3 years and go after those because there's excess profits likely that have been baked into the analysis. And then start looking at what we refer to as the 5 drivers of purchase spend. Look at the items and ask, is there some technology change we can make? Is there a new product technologies within our industry or product technologies from other industries or some new processes that we can utilize or the companies similar to us utilize or other companies utilize? Look for material content changes. Try to figure out how to reduce the content. If the plastic is 7/64 of an inch thick, why can't it be 6/64 of an inch thick? Try to find ways to use less material. Also, nothing increases or nothing improves performance in terms of purchase spend better than volume changes. The more volume gives suppliers, the lower the incremental cost typically gets. So look for those. Look for at every component and look at where it's going, not just in terms of the usages you have, but the usages in the industry. And this is one of the reasons why we try to drive engineering to use catalog components instead of custom components, because they leverage a lot of other customers, a lot of other people, not even in your industry, but outside of your industry. And also get out and take a look at what suppliers can reduce costs through process improvements, whether it's through yield improvements or supplier cycle time improvements or method changes. Look for supplier process changes. And finally, negotiate better. Negotiations are always won by he who has the best information, and oftentimes the most information. So get to know a lot about your suppliers. Get to know how many people they have, and their methods and their processes and their types of equipment, and their caliber of people, etc. Get to know all of that. It will make negotiations easier. Now, there's 5 important transformational changes that always occur during economic recessions. I've talked about these, but I wanted to summarize them. One is that prosperity always goes to those with capital. I learned from a great oil trader a number of years ago when prices of raw oil were going up. Remember the days when it went from 30 to 130. And he said to me this. He says, there's never a shortage of oil, just a shortage of capital for those who need to buy the oil. So preserving your capital is creating alternatives and opportunities when economic tough times arrive. I also learned that market share more readily trades hands during a recession, and that there's a rare opportunity in recession or near recession times to right-size your organization and even right-size your compensation system, number 4. And then in these kinds of times, survival typically trumps advancement mentality. It gives us the ability to focus, and so just getting focused itself sometimes is half the battle. And with that, I would like to open to questions and answers. I see during the program we've already had a number of people who've asked some questions, so let me just go through a couple. We only have time for about 2 of them here, and so I'll try to deal with those. And then for those of you who we haven't dealt with live, we'll send you a note back, and we'll deal with it via email or text or something. So let's deal with the first question from Shelley. Shelley from, I think, Buffalo. Yeah, Buffalo. Shelley asked the question about right sizing of compensation systems. And she talks in her question about bonuses seem to be discretionary. Is there a better way to offer bonuses? The answer to that is, Shelley, absolutely yes. So here's kind of my rule of thumb on developing a incentive compensation system. This is not salary now, this is incentive comp. First, at the end of the year, you have to decide how much of the remaining cash generated during that year is going to be made available for bonus compensation. But before you can do that, you have to realize the following. The first taker of excess cash is going to be the government taxing organization. So you've got to take care of the taxes first. And then you need to take care of the shareholders, whether it's through dividends or whether it's through socking away some money for future rainy day funds. The third is actually reserves for equipment replacement and those kinds of things. This is what I call sustaining investments. And then the fourth is what's left over is the pool that you can divide up. So if you paid your taxes, you set aside the 8% for the shareholders, the 3% for the rainy day equipment replacement fund. And that, let's just say that leaves you with $5 million. Well, that $5 million is now available. You have to build a compensation system that first gives people some compensation based on the performance of the company. If the company doesn't perform, that's kind of the eligibility point. So we have plenty of comp systems we've put into companies that strongly suggest that before any functional, that is departmental bonus can be paid, the company has to pass a threshold of cash flow, return on investment, cash over gross assets, or some other valuation metric. So yes, and that's the way you do it, and you start the logic that the shareholders get paid first. That's a tough logic. A lot of people think that I worked here all year long, I should get a bonus, but the shareholders are a total risk, and we need to make sure that they're taken care of. And then we should share in what's left over, and I think that's perfectly valid. So now, by the way, a side note, the way the president or the CEO should be bonused in our world, we believe presidents should be compensated based on how effective their direct reports are, aka the vice presidents. So the vice presidents are earning big bonuses because valuation of the company is going up, then the CEO should. We don't ever believe a CEO should get a bonus if the people below them aren't earning bonuses. If the people below them aren't earning bonuses, especially if it goes on year after year after year, you got to ask, what kind of leadership is the CEO executing? So a CEO, I don't know what their job is if it isn't to find ways to get impediments out of the way of the senior leadership team. That's what they exist for. So we have a lot. If you want to learn a lot more about that, please write us or call us. We have a lot to say about C-suite and all the way down to the bottom compensation systems. I sit on the comp committees of most boards of directors that I sit on, and I've worked on this, and I can tell you this for sure. You get what you measure, and you continue to get what you reward. Never forget that. You get what you measure, and you continue to get what you reward. And so high-end comp systems can be designed to shape the right kinds of behaviors if you do it right. So Mel from Texas, the second question, I think it's the only one we're going to have time for. He asked the question of why did you on the reducing of lead time item. This is where we took the 20%, the items that accounted for 80% of the queue and whacked their lead time by 20% and reran MRP. He says, why did you pick the 80%? Why not 50% or why not 95%? And the answer is totally arbitrary, Mel. Absolutely arbitrary. We picked 80 because everybody's kind of cognizant of the Vilfredo Pareto's 80-20 rule. So that was the only reason. You could pick whatever number you're comfortable with. We have some clients that every Friday they take the 20% of the items that are behind about 80% of the queue. One of our clients, it's 5% of the items are responsible for 80% of the queue, and they work those. And they just keep working those. And notice what they're doing. They're working whip. And when whip comes down, that means your lead times and cycle times come down. That means you need less safety stock before in raw material, less safety stock in finished goods because your company's more responsive. So if you're using a formula-driven safety stock for raw and finished goods, those numbers will naturally come down by focusing on WIP. That is the secret to inventory reduction. Focus on WIP. Mel, I don't care if it's 80% or 40% or 90%. Pick a number. All right, with that, I think we're going to have to wrap up today. This is as much time as we have. I'd very much like to thank all of you for attending another of our MEI Third Thursday Operations Improvement Series e-learning programs. These are always a lot of fun, and I really appreciate it. On behalf of the Manufacturing Executive Institute and on behalf of myself, Alan Dunn, President of GDI Consulting and Training Company, I'd really like to thank you all for attending today. If you need to have more information, please go to www.mfgexecutive.com. Thanks for attending. Bye-bye now.